The aroma of freshly made tortillas wafted through the kitchen of Carmen's Hearth restaurant in downtown San Antonio, mingling with the smell of poblano chilies roasting on the industrial griddle. Remedios Morales wiped the sweat from her forehead with her stained apron as she flipped one by one the tortillas she had been patting since 5 a.m. 7 months pregnant, her belly already made it difficult for her to move between the huge gas stoves and stainless steel work tables where she prepared the sauces for breakfast. But she had no choice. Roberto, her husband and owner of the family business, had been clear. This restaurant is yours too, but as long as I'm the one bringing home the money, we work here the way I say. Remedios was 24 years old and had been married to Roberto Vasquez, heir to the restaurant founded by his late mother, for 2 years. At first, he had promised her that they would be equal partners, that she would learn all the secrets of the business, and that together they would make it grow. But the promises had turned into slavery, and the partnership into constant humiliation. Remedios. Roberto's voice cut through the noise of boiling pots and the radio playing old ranchera songs. The chiles en nogada for table 4 aren't ready. It's 7 o'clock, and the customer is already asking. Remedios felt the baby move restlessly in her belly, as if it too could feel the tension that gripped her every time she heard that angry voice echoing throughout the kitchen. "They're almost ready, Roberto," she replied, trying to remain calm as she finished peeling the last poblano chilies. "All that's left is the nogada sauce and nothing else." "Nothing else?" Roberto interrupted her, bursting into the kitchen like an angry bull, his apron stained with grease and his face red with rage. "It's always nothing else with you. The customer has been waiting for 15 minutes. The 2 waiters who were preparing the trays for the other tables discreetly turned away, pretending not to hear, but unable to avoid witnessing the scene that was repeated every day. "I'm sorry, my love," Remedios murmured, trying to work faster despite the back pain that had been torturing her since she arrived at the restaurant at 5 a.m. "It's just that with the baby, it's harder for me to move, and don't give me that pregnancy story," Roberto shouted, approaching until he was standing right behind her. "My mother worked in this same kitchen until the day she gave birth to my siblings, and she never complained like you do." Remedios could feel the employees' stares, a mixture of pity and discomfort. She knew they all talked about her when Roberto wasn't whispering about how he treated her, but no one dared say anything. Roberto was the boss, the one who decided who stayed and who went. "Excuse me," she said to Javier, the youngest waiter, who had stopped arranging his tray to watch the show. "Don't you have work to do?" The boy lowered his head and walked away toward the dining room, but Remedios knew he was still listening to everything from the swinging door. "And you?" Roberto turned to her, his eyes bloodshot with anger. "Stop playing the victim. We all work equally hard here. My sister Leticia is 5 months pregnant, and she's not complaining like you." Remedios continued peeling chilies, concentrating on not cutting herself with the knife as her hands trembled. She had learned that it was better not to contradict Roberto when he was like this, especially in front of the employees. "And another thing," he continued, now in a lower but equally venomous tone, "these chilies are burnt. How could you serve something like this? What will the customers think?" Remedios looked up at the poblano chilies. They were perfectly roasted, with slightly charred skin and soft insides, exactly as she had learned to make them by watching Doña Carmen during the first years of her marriage. "They're well roasted, Roberto. It's the same as always. Aren't they fine?" Roberto's voice rose again, causing Remedios to instinctively take a step back. Who knows about cooking here? Who grew up in this restaurant? Who learned the recipes as a child? The silence in the kitchen was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Even the radio seemed to have turned down the volume. "Throw them away," Roberto ordered, pointing to the tray with the chilies. "All of them, and start over." "But Roberto, there are 12 chilies. They're ready. You just have to throw them away. I told you." Roberto's voice echoed throughout the restaurant. Remedios was sure that even the customers in the dining room had heard the shout. With trembling hands and eyes beginning to fill with tears that she refused to shed in front of the employees, Remedios picked up the tray and walked toward the trash can. One by one, she threw away the poblano peppers she had been preparing for the last hour. Perfect peppers, carefully roasted, seasoned with love, now reduced to waste by the whim of a man who needed to demonstrate his power. "That's better," Roberto said with satisfaction, watching his pregnant wife throw her work in the trash. "Now do them right, and next time think before you cook. This business has a reputation to uphold." He headed for the kitchen door, but before leaving, he turned one last time. "Remedios," he added, with a cruel smile, "when you finish the new chilies, start cleaning the grills. They're disgusting." And with that, Roberto left the kitchen, leaving Remedios standing next to the trash can, with her hands stained with grease and chili, her belly heavy with the baby she was carrying, and her heart broken by the humiliation. The employees gradually returned to their tasks, avoiding eye contact with her, but Remedios could hear the whispers, the pitying looks, the comments they thought she couldn't hear. Poor thing, how he treats her. And pregnant? As she began to prepare new poblano chilies, Remedios discreetly caressed her bulging belly. "Don't worry, my love," she whispered to her baby. "This won't last forever." But what Remedios didn't know at the time was that the humiliations of that morning were only the beginning of a day that would change her life forever, and that the words she had just whispered to her unborn child would become a promise she would fulfill in the most unexpected way. It was almost noon when the order that would change everything for Remedios arrived. The restaurant Carmen's Hearth was at its most chaotic, tables full of office workers, families waiting for their meals, and the kitchen roaring like a hungry beast. Remedios moved between the stoves with the heaviness of 7 months of pregnancy, preparing red pozole for table 6. When she heard Javier, the waiter, shouting from the pass, "Remedios! Table 12 wants the mole back," she stopped dead in her tracks, the ladle full of pozole suspended in the air. "What's wrong with it?" she asked, approaching the pass where Javier was holding the plate of chicken in mole poblano that she had prepared with special care. "He says it's too salty," Javier replied, avoiding her gaze, "and that he wants to talk to the chef." Remedios felt her throat close up. She had tasted that mole 3 times before serving it. It was perfect, with the exact balance of chocolate, chilies, and spices that Doña Carmen had taught her years ago. "Who's at table 12?" she asked, even though something in her stomach already told her the answer. Don Fernando Salinas came with his wife and another couple. He says he's been a customer since the restaurant opened and has never tasted such bad mole. Don Fernando Salinas, the owner of the largest stationery store in San Antonio, a personal friend of Roberto's since childhood, and one of those customers who thought they owned the place. Remedios knew that Don Fernando had a reputation for being difficult, always finding faults with the food to get discounts or free meals. But she also knew that Roberto would never believe that from her. "Tell him I'll make another dish," said Remedios, starting to walk toward the stove. "No," Roberto's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Tell Don Fernando that the chef is coming to explain what happened." Remedios turned to her husband, who had appeared in the kitchen with that expression she had learned to fear. "Roberto, I can make another mole. It's no problem." "Of course it's a problem," he interrupted, approaching her with slow, deliberate steps. "Don Fernando has been a customer of this restaurant since before you arrived. If he says the mole is bad, it's because it's bad." The noises in the kitchen seemed to have faded. The employees worked in silence, but Remedios could feel all eyes on them. "But Roberto, I tasted it several times. It's exactly how it should be." Roberto's voice had become dangerously low, "just like my mother taught you, just like you've been doing for 2 years. Is that what you're going to tell me?" Remedios remained silent, but Roberto continued, "Because if that's what you're going to tell me, then we have a very big problem, Remedios. Because Don Fernando has been eating my mother's mole for 20 years, and he has never, ever complained." He moved closer until Remedios could smell the alcohol on his breath. Roberto had been drinking since 11 in the morning, something he was doing more and more often. "So tell me," he whispered, "what did you do differently this time?" "Nothing, Roberto. I did it the same as always." "I swear, don't swear at me," Roberto shouted, his voice echoing throughout the kitchen. "I'm sick of your swearing. I'm sick of you doing everything wrong and then swearing that you did it right." Remedios instinctively backed away, but her back bumped into the work table. She had nowhere to go. "Roberto, please lower your voice," she whispered, aware that all the employees were witnessing the scene. "The customers can hear us." "Are you telling me to shut up?" Roberto moved closer, his eyes bloodshot with alcohol and rage. "In my own restaurant, in the business my mother built with her own hands." "No, my love, I'm not." "Yes, you are telling me to shut up, as always. First you ruin the food, and then you want to shut me up when I complain." Remedios could see out of the corner of her eye that Javier was discreetly approaching, probably to intervene, but she waved him away. The last thing she needed was for Roberto to get worse. "It's okay," Remedios said, trying to sound calm. "I'll make another mole, a perfect one, and you can take it to Don Fernando yourself." "Another mole?" Roberto laughed bitterly. "With what time? With what ingredients? Do you know how much chocolate for mole costs? Do you know how much the chilies you wasted this morning cost?" "Shut up," he shouted, and something in his voice made Remedios know she had crossed a line. "I'm sick and tired of your mistakes." And then it happened. Roberto's hand moved so fast that Remedios couldn't react. The slap echoed throughout the kitchen like a gunshot, followed by the sound of ladles falling to the floor as the employees froze in shock. The pain was instant and burning, but it was nothing compared to the humiliation. Remedios brought her hand to her cheek, feeling the heat spread across her face as tears began to stream from her eyes. But worst of all was feeling the baby move violently in her womb, as if it had felt the blow, too. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Even the radio had stopped playing. Roberto stood in front of her with his hand still in the air, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. His face showed a mixture of shock and something that could have been regret. "Remedios," he began with a trembling voice, but she was no longer listening. All her attention was focused on her belly, where the baby continued to move restlessly, as if trying to protect itself from something it didn't understand. "The baby," she whispered, caressing her belly with trembling hands. "Remedios." Roberto approached, but she immediately pulled away. "Don't touch me," she said. Her voice was barely audible, but it was filled with a firmness that Roberto had never heard before. For the first time in 2 years of marriage, Roberto backed away. Remedios slowly straightened up, wiping her tears with her apron. She could feel all the employees' eyes on her, but she no longer cared. Something had changed in those seconds after the blow. "I'm going to make another mole," she said in a clear voice, heading for the stove. "And it's going to be perfect. Remedios." Roberto tried to speak again, and then she continued without looking at him. "I'm going home to rest. The doctor says I need more rest, but we have the afternoon shift. You have the afternoon shift," she corrected him, turning on the burner under a clean pot. "I have a baby to protect." Roberto stood there for several more seconds, as if waiting for Remedios to return to being the submissive woman she had been until that moment. But something in her posture, in the way she held the ladle, in the way she caressed her belly, told him that that woman was gone forever. "All right," Roberto finally murmured. "Make the mole, but make sure it's done right." And with that, he left the kitchen, leaving Remedios surrounded by the uncomfortable silence of the employees who had just witnessed the moment when everything changed. As she began to roast the chilies for the new mole, Remedios touched her cheek, which was still burning, and made a silent promise to herself. Never again, no matter what she had to do, no matter the cost, she would never again allow anyone to hurt her baby, not even his own father. The nights at the house in the neighborhood of San Antonio had become endless for Remedios. It was 2 a.m., and she was awake again, caressing her belly as she listened to Roberto snoring, who had come home drunk after closing the restaurant. Her cheek no longer hurt, but every time she touched the area where he had hit her 3 days ago, she felt a rage growing like fire in her chest. "My baby," she whispered to her unborn child, feeling it move gently beneath her skin. "Your mommy was a fool for putting up with it for so long, wasn't she? But no more. I promise you." She got out of bed carefully so as not to wake Roberto, and walked to the kitchen. It was small compared to the restaurant's, but it had a round table by the window where she used to sit and think when she couldn't sleep. She opened the drawer where she kept her personal belongings, and took out a flowered notebook she had bought at the market the year before. For months, she had used it to write down recipes. But tonight, it had a different purpose. On the first page, she wrote, "Plan to protect my baby." For 3 nights in a row, Remedios had been remembering the words of her grandmother Soledad, who had died when she was 15, but whose voice still echoed in her memory, like an echo of ancient wisdom. "My daughter," Soledad had said to her one afternoon as they prepared tamales in her kitchen in Cholula. "Men think women are weak because we cry, because we stay silent, because we endure, but they are wrong. We are like water. We seem soft, but we can move mountains if we know how to flow." Remedios began to write in the notebook. Hidden money, 10,000 pesos saved from restaurant tips, important documents, birth certificate, ID card, papers for the baby when it's born, allies, Doña Lupita, neighbor Esperanza, the trusted restaurant employee, safe place, my cousin Rocio's house in New Braunfels. For the last 3 nights, she had been observing everything with new eyes. Roberto's schedule, his routines, his weaknesses, and above all, she had been paying attention to the people who really supported her. Doña Lupita, her 60-year-old neighbor, had been the first to realize that something was wrong. 2 days after the blow, when Remedios was leaving the house wearing dark glasses, even though it was cloudy, Lupita had stopped her at the door. "My daughter," she had said in that maternal voice that only Mexican grandmothers know how to use, "if you ever need a place to stay, my door is always open." She hadn't asked anything else, but the look they exchanged told them everything they needed to know. At the restaurant, Esperanza Ruiz had been her silent guardian angel. At 45, Esperanza had worked in Doña Carmen's kitchen since before Roberto married Remedios and had witnessed how his behavior had worsened over the months. Esperanza had whispered to her that afternoon as they washed dishes together, "You know you can count on me for anything, right?" "What do you mean?" "Hope. Anything," the older woman had repeated, holding Remedios' gaze. "Whenever, wherever, however." Now, sitting in her kitchen at 2 a.m., Remedios understood that she was not alone. There were women in her life who had seen what she was going through, women who were waiting for her to decide to act. She continued writing in her notebook. Roberto's documents, restaurant papers, bank accounts, licenses, his secrets, the bottles hidden in the office, the fake invoices, the money he took from the cash register, because Remedios had seen things. Over the last few months, she had noticed how Roberto manipulated the restaurant's numbers, how he invented false expenses to justify the money he took for his drinking binges, how he had been taking out loans in the name of the business without telling her. His routine: he arrives drunk at 2 a.m., sleeps until 10, and goes to the restaurant at 11. On his day off, Sundays, he goes to bet on cockfights with his friends in San Andres, Cholula. His greatest fear is that his mother will find out how he treats me. That last part was important. Doña Carmen had died 3 years ago, but Roberto still spoke of her as if she were a saint. "My mother always said, my mother would never have tolerated this. My mother built this business with honor." What Roberto didn't know was that Remedios had found letters. Letters that Doña Carmen had written, but never sent. Letters in which she talked about her own fears about her son's character. Letters in which she worried about the kind of husband he would be. Doña Carmen's letters were hidden in the attic in the wooden box by the window. Remedios had found those letters by accident 2 weeks ago when she was looking for Christmas decorations that Roberto had asked her to bring down. One of them was addressed to a sister who lived in California. "Carmen, I'm worried about Roberto. Every day he looks more and more like his father. And you know how he was with me. I've given him everything, maybe too much. I'm afraid that when he gets married and has children, he won't know how to treat a woman. Help me teach him that a wife is not a servant." The letter had never been sent, but there it was, in Doña Carmen's unmistakable handwriting, admitting that she knew exactly what kind of man her son was. Remedios closed the notebook and hid it back in the drawer, under the recipes. Tomorrow she would begin to put her plan into action. But tonight, she just wanted to talk to her baby. She lay down on the bed, placing her hands on her 8-month-old belly. "You know what, my love," she whispered. "Your grandmother Carmen wrote something very important. She said that a wife is not a servant, and your mommy is going to make sure your daddy learns that lesson, but not in the way he expects. She felt the baby move, as if responding to her words. "We're going to be free, my child. Both of us. I promise." Roberto stirred in bed, muttering something in his sleep about outstanding bills and difficult clients. Remedios looked at him in the dark, studying the face of the man she had loved, respected, and obeyed. And for the first time in 2 years, she felt no fear, only determination. In a week, when the contractions began, Roberto Vasquez would discover that the quiet, submissive woman he had married was gone forever. And in her place, something much more dangerous had been born, a mother protecting her child. It was Friday afternoon, and the restaurant Carmen's Hearth was bustling with weekend activity. Remedios, now 8.5 months pregnant, moved heavily between the stoves, preparing orders for the tables that were filling up with families from San Antonio who had come for dinner. Her plan had been working perfectly for the last 2 weeks. She had managed to hide almost 3,000 pesos in a bank account that Roberto didn't know about, with the help of Esperanza, who had used her own ID to open it. The important documents were kept at Doña Lupita's house and her cousin Rocio's in New Braunfels. She already knew that she might need a place to stay for a few days, but that afternoon, something was going to change everything. Remedios. Roberto's voice cut through the noise of the kitchen as usual, but this time there was something different, something more dangerous. "Come here immediately." Remedios left the stew she was preparing and headed for the small office at the back of the restaurant where Roberto kept the accounts. When she entered, she found her husband sitting behind the wooden desk that had belonged to his mother, with a half-empty bottle of tequila and papers scattered all over the surface. "Close the door," he ordered. Remedios obeyed, but kept her hand on the handle. Something in Roberto's eyes told her that this conversation was going to be different from all the previous ones. "Do you know what I just found out?" Roberto asked, taking a swig straight from the bottle. "No, Roberto." "What?" "That my wife, the mother of my unborn child, is stealing from me." Remedios' heart stopped for a second, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. "What are you talking about?" Roberto held up a piece of paper that Remedios recognized immediately. It was the restaurant's cash register statement. "I'm talking about the fact that in the last 2 weeks, exactly 2,700 pesos have been missing from the register." Roberto stood up slowly, still holding the bottle. "Money that only you and I can touch." "Roberto, I haven't touched anything. Don't lie to me," she shouted, smashing the bottle against the wall. Shards of glass scattered across the office, and the smell of spilled tequila filled the air. Remedios took a step back, but Roberto was already moving toward her. "For 2 years, I've put up with your mistakes," he hissed, cornering her against the door. "I've put up with you ruining the food, being slow, making me look bad in front of customers. But this is too much. Roberto, please, think of the baby. The baby. The baby." Roberto laughed cruelly. "It's always the baby. You know what? Maybe the baby would be better off without a thief for a mother." The words fell like daggers. Remedio felt something break inside her chest, something that was not just fear, but pure rage. "What did you say?" "You heard me. Maybe my son needs a real mother, not one." Roberto couldn't finish his sentence because Remedio pushed him with a strength she didn't know she had. "Don't you dare threaten my baby," she shouted, her voice breaking between rage and tears. "You can say whatever you want to me. You can hit me. You can humiliate me. But don't you dare touch my son." Roberto was taken aback for a moment, but then his face twisted into a smile that Remedios had never seen before. A smile that made her blood run cold. "Or what?" he asked, approaching her again. "What are you going to do, Remedios? Divorce me? With what money? With what lawyer? Where are you going to go with a newborn baby?" Each question was a slap in the face. "This restaurant is mine. This house is mine. You have nothing, Remedios, absolutely nothing that isn't mine." Roberto moved closer until his face was inches from hers. "And if you try to leave, if you try to take my son, I'll destroy you. I'll say you're a thief, that you're a bad mother, that you're crazy. Who's going to believe you? The employees who have seen me work day and night to make this business succeed. The customers who have known me since I was a child." Remedios felt the walls of the office closing in on her. Roberto was right. He had all the power, all the credibility, all the connections. But then she felt something that saved her. Her baby moved. And in that movement, Remedios remembered Doña Carmen's letters. The letters where she admitted that she knew exactly what kind of monster she had raised. "You know what, Roberto?" she said in a voice that surprised them both with how calm it sounded. "You're right. I have nothing." Roberto smiled with satisfaction. "But I also have nothing to lose," Remedios continued, "which makes me very dangerous." Roberto's smile faded. "Because a wounded animal is unpredictable, Roberto. And you just wounded the wrong animal." Roberto raised his hand to hit her again, but something in Remedios's eyes stopped him. It was no longer the look of a frightened woman. It was the look of a woman who had crossed a line and had nothing left to lose. "Touch me again," Remedios whispered, "and you'll find out what I'm capable of." For the first time in 2 years, Roberto backed away. Remedios headed for the door, but before leaving, she turned one last time. "Oh, and Roberto," she added with a smile that would have frightened the devil himself, "I hope you enjoyed your power, because your time is running out." "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means that in a week I'm going to give birth, and after that you're going to find out who I really am." She left the office, leaving Roberto standing among the broken glass and the smell of tequila, unaware that he had just awakened something that had been dormant inside his wife for too long. That night, Remedios sat down again in her kitchen with the flowery notebook. But this time, she didn't write any more plans. This time, she wrote a single line. "Roberto Vasquez, today you signed your death warrant." Not literally, of course, but the death of everything he thought he controlled. In a week, when she had her baby in her arms, Roberto would discover that he had made the wrong woman his enemy, and that some battles are not won with strength, but with patience, intelligence, and the sacred fury of a mother protecting her child. It was Tuesday morning, 5 days before the expected date of delivery, when Remedios set the first phase of her plan in motion. Roberto had left early for the historic Market Square market to buy vegetables, as he did every Tuesday, which gave her exactly 3 hours to act. But this time, she was not going alone. "Are you sure about this, boss?" Esperanza asked as they climbed the stairs to the attic of the house. "If Don Roberto finds out, Roberto won't find out anything," replied Remedios, opening the door to the small attic where Doña Carmen's old things were kept. "And I told you not to call me boss. We're friends, right?" Esperanza smiled. At 45, she had raised 4 children alone after her husband abandoned them, and she recognized the determination in a woman's eyes when she had made a decision that could not be reversed. "There it is," said Remedios, pointing to a wooden box next to the small attic window. "Everything we need is in there." Esperanza opened the box carefully, and her eyes widened when she saw the contents. Letters, documents, photographs, and a sealed envelope with the name Roberto, written in Doña Carmen's elegant handwriting. "My God," Esperanza murmured as she read the first letter. Doña Carmen knew exactly what her son was like. She knew and felt guilty about it, Remedios replied, sitting heavily in an old chair, but she never did anything to change it. Now it was up to someone else to fix what she couldn't. Over the next hour, the 2 women meticulously organized the contents of the box. Doña Carmen's letters admitting her fears about Roberto, documents showing how she had had to pay her son's gambling debts when he was young, photographs of Roberto drunk at family events, his face swollen and his eyes glassy. But the most important thing was the sealed envelope. "Shall we open it?" asked Esperanza. "No," replied Remedios. "That's for later, for when Roberto needs to read the last words his saintly mother wrote to him." They put everything in a plastic bag that Esperanza would take home until the time came to use it. "Now comes the hard part," said Remedios as they came down from the attic. The hard part was the restaurant. That afternoon, while Roberto was in the office with the account books, Remedios discreetly met with each of Doña Carmen's kitchen staff. Not all at once, but one by one, during the quietest moments. First was Javier, the young waiter who had witnessed the slap the week before. "Javier," Remedios said as he cleaned tables, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." The 19-year-old looked at her nervously. Yes, Doña Remedios. Have you seen how Don Roberto treats me? Javier looked down, uncomfortable. It's not my place to say anything, ma'am. I'm not asking you to say anything. Remedios interrupted him gently. I'm asking you if you've seen it, yes or no? Yes, Javier murmured. Yes, I've seen it. And what do you think about that? Javier looked up, and Remedios could see that he had been waiting for someone to ask him that question. I think it's wrong, Doña Remedios. Very wrong. My dad never hit my mom, not even when he was drunk or angry. A man doesn't hit a pregnant woman. Would you be willing to say that in front of other people, if necessary? Javier didn't hesitate for a second. Yes, ma'am, I would. The conversation with Maria, the weekend cook, was similar. So was the one he had with Don Aurelio, the 60-year-old dishwasher who had worked at the restaurant since Doña Carmen's time. One by one, they all told him the same thing. They had seen the abuse. They thought it was terrible, and they were willing to speak up if necessary. But the most important conversation was with Esperanza. I need you to take pictures tomorrow night when Roberto is drunk as usual, Remedios told her as they prepared vegetables for the next day's stew. Pictures of what? Of the bottles hidden in the office, of the loan papers he's taken out in the restaurant's name, of the fake invoices he makes up to justify the money he steals. Esperanza nodded. And then what? Then you're going to go to the office computer and print out the bank statements for the last 6 months. The real ones, not the ones Roberto shows me. Do you know the password? Remedios smiled for the first time in weeks. The password is Doña Carmen, 975. Roberto thinks he's very clever, but he uses the same password for everything. That night, Remedios sat in her kitchen one last time with the flowery notebook. She no longer needed to make any more plans. Everything was ready. In 2 days, on Wednesday night, Roberto would do what he did every Wednesday. He would go to San Andres, Cholula, to bet on cockfights with his friends, drink until he passed out, and return home at 2 a.m., expecting to find his submissive and quiet wife waiting for him. But this time, the house would be empty. And on Thursday morning, when Roberto woke up with the worst hangover of his life, he would discover that his world had completely fallen apart. Remedios caressed her belly, feeling her baby's strong kicks. Almost there, my love, she whispered. We're almost at the end of this nightmare. She closed the notebook and put it away in the drawer for the last time. Tomorrow she would burn it along with all the memories of the weak woman she had been for the past 2 years. Because that woman was going to die on Wednesday night, and in her place, something Roberto Vasquez had never imagined possible was going to be born. An enemy who knew all his secrets, who had all the evidence, and who had absolutely nothing to lose. On Thursday morning, Roberto Vasquez was going to discover that he had been married to the wrong woman, and that mistakes like that come at a high price. It was Wednesday night, and everything was going exactly as Remedios had planned. Roberto had gone to the cockfights in San Andres, Cholula, at 7 p.m., as he did every Wednesday, taking 500 pesos from the restaurant cash register and promising to return early. But Remedios knew he wouldn't be back until 2 a.m., drunk and in a bad mood, because he would have lost all the money gambling. By that time, she would no longer be there. At 8 p.m., Esperanza arrived at the house with a small suitcase and a determined expression. "Ready, comadre?" she asked, using for the first time the affectionate term that Mexican women reserve for their closest friends. "Ready," Remedios replied, although her heart was beating so hard that she was sure it could be heard throughout the house. They had packed only the essentials: clothes for the baby, important documents, their savings, and the medicine the doctor had prescribed for the birth. Everything else could stay behind. Roberto could keep his furniture, his memories, his empty house. "Is everything ready at the restaurant?" Remedios asked as she closed the suitcase. Esperanza confirmed that it was. The photographs of the bottles, the printed bank statements, the written testimonies of all the employees. Javier even recorded a video on his phone talking about what he has seen. And Doña Carmen's letters are already in the restaurant office, on the desk where Roberto will find them tomorrow morning, along with a note from you. Remedios smiled. The note had been her finishing touch. "Would you leave that note for Remedios? Write it in the comments." Roberto, if you want your family back, it will have to be on my terms. I am no longer the woman who lets herself be beaten. I am the mother of your child, and that makes me the most dangerous person in the world to you. Your mother's letters are here to remind you of who you really are. When you're ready to truly change, you can come find me, but this time, I make the rules. Remedios. She left the house at 8:30 p.m., with Esperanza driving her old blue Tsuru to New Braunfels, where their cousin Rotio was waiting for them with a bed ready and hot food. But fate had other plans. If the story caught you right here, leave a like. The rest gets even tougher. At 9:15 p.m., as they were driving along the highway connecting San Antonio to New Braunfels, Remedios felt the first contraction. Esperanza said, trying to remain calm, "I think we have a problem. What's wrong, comadre?" "The baby is coming." Esperanza slammed on the brakes and immediately pulled over to the side of the road. "Are you sure?" Sometimes they're false contractions. Another contraction, stronger than the first, cut her off. Remedios bent forward, breathing as the nurse had taught her in prenatal classes. "They're not false," she managed to say between breaths. "The baby is coming now. Subscribe so you don't miss true stories like this. The new episode is on the way." Esperanza turned on the emergency lights and took out her cell phone. "I'm going to call an ambulance." "No." Remedios stopped her by grabbing her arm. "If you call the ambulance, they'll take us to the General Hospital in San Antonio. Roberto has friends there. He'll find out." "But comadre, we can't stay here on the highway. How far are we from the hospital in Atlix?" Esperanza calculated mentally. "About 20 minutes. Then drive fast." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Remedios' life. The contractions came every 3 minutes, each one more intense than the last, while Esperanza drove down the dark road as if she were in an action movie. "Hang in there, my love," Remedios whispered to her baby. "Hang in there a little longer. You can't be born in an old car in the middle of the road. You have to be born free." They arrived at the municipal hospital in New Braunfels at 10:15 p.m., with Remedios already screaming in pain and Esperanza desperately honking the horn for someone to come out and help them. "Help!" Esperanza shouted, as 2 nurses ran toward the car with a wheelchair. "My friend is giving birth." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. White hallways, bright lights, voices shouting medical instructions, and the most intense pain Remedios had ever felt in her life. But at 11:43 p.m. on Wednesday night, everything changed. "It's a boy!" the doctor shouted, "and he's perfectly healthy." The baby's cry filled the delivery room like heavenly music. Remedios began to cry when they placed him in her arms. 5 pounds, 2 ounces of absolute perfection, with dark eyes and clenched fists, as if he were already ready to fight for what was his. "Hello, my warrior," she whispered, kissing his tiny forehead. "We are free now." It was midnight when Esperanza was able to enter the room where Remedios was resting with her baby. "What are you going to name him?" she asked, caressing the child's cheek. Remedios replied without hesitation, "Emiliano, like Emiliano Zapata, because he is going to be a revolutionary like his mother." "And what are we going to do about Roberto?" Remedios looked toward the bedroom window, where the first light of Thursday's dawn was already visible. "Roberto must be arriving home right now," she said with a smile that was not at all maternal, but rather vengeful. Drunk, lost, expecting to find his submissive wife waiting for him in bed. Instead, he will find an empty house and a note that will change his life forever. Esperanza smiled too. "And then," said Remedios, pulling Emiliano close to her chest, "he'll have to decide if he wants to meet his son, but this time, it will be on my terms. And if he doesn't accept. Remedios finished the sentence with a voice that would have made Roberto himself tremble. "He'll discover that a man can lose much more than a wife and a son. He can lose his reputation, his business, his freedom, and everything he ever thought he controlled." At 2 a.m. on Thursday, as Roberto Vasquez staggered home drunk to his empty house, still unaware that his life had just changed forever, Remedios Morales looked at her newborn son and made a promise to herself. "You will never know fear, as your mother did," he whispered to Emiliano, "because your mother made sure that no one will ever hurt us again. The plan had worked perfectly. Well, almost perfectly, because Roberto still didn't know that the best was yet to come. Thursday dawned gray and rainy in San Antonio, as if the sky itself knew that it was the day Roberto Vasquez would lose everything he thought he had. It was 7 a.m. when Roberto woke up in his empty bed, with the most brutal hangover of his life, his head pounding like a drill. The house was plunged into a strange silence, different from the submissive silence he was used to. This was the silence of total absence. "Remedios," he growled, hoping to hear the familiar sound of her moving around in the kitchen, making coffee and tortillas, as she had done every morning for 2 years. "Nothing, Remedios," he shouted louder, but his voice only bounced off the empty walls. He got up bravely, still dressed in yesterday's clothes that stank of cigarettes, beer, and the despair of a man who had lost 500 pesos betting on a rooster that died in the first round. The kitchen was spotless, too spotless. There were no dirty dishes, no coffee made, no signs that anyone had eaten breakfast there. But what disturbed him most was what was missing. The small coffee maker that Remedios used every morning, the Talavera cups she always left in the dish rack, the flowered apron that always hung on the hook next to the stove. "Remedios, where the hell are you?" He ran to the bedroom, and that's where reality hit him like a punch in the stomach. The closet was half empty. The small blue suitcase was missing, as were the maternity clothes and the comfortable shoes she wore to work. On the dresser, where their wedding photo had always been, there was now only a white envelope with her name written in Remedios's careful handwriting. His hands were shaking, not just from the hangover, but from a fear that was beginning to grow in his chest like a tumor. Roberto opened the envelope. "Roberto, if you want your family back, it will have to be on my terms. I am no longer the woman who lets herself be beaten. I am the mother of your child, and that makes me the most dangerous person in the world to you. Your mother's letters are in your office to remind you of who you really are. When you're ready to truly change, you can come find me. But this time, I make the rules. Remedios." Roberto read the note 3 times before the words really penetrated his intoxicated brain. "My mother's letters," he muttered. "What letters is she talking about?" He got dressed quickly and drove to the restaurant like a madman, honking at every car that got in his way, cursing under his breath and trying to process what was happening. Doña Carmen's restaurant was closed. A sign hung on the front door, "Closed for family reasons." Roberto opened it with his key, and from the moment he set foot in the restaurant, he knew something was terribly wrong. The employees weren't there. Not Esperanza, not Javier, not Maria, not Don Aurelio. No one. He ran to his office, and that's where his world completely fell apart. On the wooden desk that had belonged to his mother was an open box full of yellowed letters, photographs, and documents that Roberto had never seen before. And on top of it all was a sealed envelope with Doña Carmen's unmistakable handwriting that read, "To Roberto, my son, for when I am no longer here to protect you from yourself." With his hands shaking violently, Roberto opened the envelope and began to read. "Roberto, my dear son, if you are reading this letter, it means that I am no longer with you, and that you have finally done something that forced me to write the words I could never say to you in life. Ever since you were a child, I saw in you the same darkness that destroyed your father, the same anger, the same need to control, the same inability to love without hurting." Roberto slumped into the chair, feeling as if someone had ripped his heart out of his chest. "I tried to raise you differently. I tried to teach you that a real man protects his family. He doesn't terrorize them, but I failed. And now the woman you chose to love is paying for my failures as a mother. If you ever read this letter, Roberto, it means you have finally lost the only good thing you had in your life. It will be your own fault." Tears began to run down Roberto's cheeks as he continued reading. "Your wife is a good woman. I see it in her eyes when she comes to work. I see it in the way she takes care of everyone in the restaurant. I see it in how she looks at you with love, even though you don't deserve it. If you lose her, Roberto, it will be because you chose to be like your father, instead of being the man I tried to raise you to be. This restaurant, this business I built with my own hands, is not yours by birthright. It is yours because I trusted you to be different. If you are reading this letter, it means that trust was a mistake. Change, my son, please, before it's too late. Your mother who loves you, but can no longer protect you. Carmen Herrera de Vasquez. Roberto finished reading the letter and sat in the absolute silence of the office, feeling as if he had died and was watching his life from the outside. That's when he noticed the other papers scattered on the desk. Bank statements showing exactly how much money he had stolen from the restaurant over the last 6 months. Photographs of the bottles of tequila hidden in his office. Copies of the fraudulent loans he had taken out in the business's name, and written testimonies from Javier, Maria, Don Aurelio, and Esperanza. All of them describing in detail every humiliation, every shout, every moment of abuse they had witnessed. But what terrified him most was the last document, an official complaint of domestic violence already signed by Remedios, dated yesterday, ready to be filed with the State Attorney General's office. And an attached note. This complaint will be filed tomorrow, Friday, at 9:00 a.m., unless I receive a call from you before 6:00 p.m. today, acknowledging that you need help and that you are willing to change. The decision is yours. Roberto looked at the clock in the office. It was 10 a.m. He had 8 hours to decide whether he wanted to try to save what was left of his life or whether he was going to let it all go to hell. But before he could fully process what he was seeing, he heard voices outside the restaurant, voices he recognized immediately. It was Don Fernando Salinas and his wife, along with other regular customers, all talking loudly about what had happened to the Vasquez family. "Did you hear what Remedy left?" said the voice of Doña Patricia, Don Fernando's wife. "Last night they saw her leaving her house with suitcases." "I'm not surprised," replied Don Fernando. "The other day I was here, and I saw how Roberto treated her. It's a shame. Her mother must be rolling in her grave. They say she's in Atlzoco," added another voice, "and that she already had the baby. The baby was born last night, a little boy, but Roberto didn't even know because he was at the cockfights, drunk as usual." Roberto looked out the office window and saw about 10 people standing in front of the restaurant, all whispering and pointing at the place. "I always said that boy was going to end up badly," said an elderly woman Roberto didn't recognize. Doña Carmen was a saint, but her son, her son, is just like his father. And what will happen to the restaurant? Well, who knows? But I'm not going back to eat here as long as that man is in charge. It's one thing to be strict, and another to be an animal. Roberto walked away from the window, feeling as if every word were a stab in the heart. In less than 24 hours, he had become the talk of the town. His reputation, which he had carefully cultivated for years, was destroyed, and worst of all, he knew he deserved it. He sat down in his chair again and picked up the phone. He dialed several numbers: his sister-in-laws, his friends, his brothers who lived in Mexico. No one knew where Remedios was. Or maybe they did, but they didn't want to tell him. At 2 p.m., Roberto had made a decision. He took a sheet of paper and began to write Remedios. "I read my mother's letters. I read the testimonies. I saw the evidence. You are right about everything. I am a monster, just like my father. I don't deserve to be the husband of a woman like you, and I definitely don't deserve to be the father of our son. But I want to change. I need to change. Not for you, because I've already lost that right. Not for the restaurant, or for what people might say. I want to change for our son, so that he doesn't grow up ashamed of having a father like me. I accept your conditions, whatever they may be. I agree to go to therapy, to stop drinking, to seek help. I accept that you set the rules for everything. When can I see the child? How can I earn your trust again? What do I have to do to prove that I can be different? I'm just asking for one chance, just one, to meet my son, and to try to be the man my mother wanted me to be, Roberto." At 5:45 in the afternoon, Roberto put the letter in an envelope and drove to New Braunfels. He didn't know if Remedios would receive him. He didn't know if she would give him the chance he was asking for. He didn't know if he could ever repair all the damage he had caused. But he knew one thing: the woman he had hit in the kitchen of his restaurant no longer existed. In her place, someone much stronger, much smarter, and much more dangerous than he had ever imagined had been born, and that woman held in her hands the power to destroy him completely, or to give him a second chance he didn't deserve. The decision was no longer his. It never would be again. Cousin Rocio's house in Atlix was small but cozy, with sky-blue adobe walls and a backyard full of pots with red and white geraniums. It was exactly the kind of place where a woman could heal, where a baby could grow up safe, where a new life could begin. It was 6 p.m. on Friday when Remedios was sitting in a wicker rocking chair in the backyard, breastfeeding Emiliano, when she heard the sound of a car pulling up in front of the house. Through the living room window, she could see Roberto's white Jetta parking on the cobblestone street. "There he is," she said to Esperanza, who was sitting in a chair next to her knitting a yellow sweater for the baby. "Are you ready for this, comadre?" Remedios looked down at the perfect face of her 2-day-old son, who was suckling peacefully, unaware that his world was about to change forever. "I'm ready," she replied, in a voice that was nothing like the fearful woman she had been until a week ago. "But he doesn't know what he's getting himself into." Rocio opened the door before Roberto could knock. At 38, she was a stronger, more direct version of Remedios, a woman who had raised 3 children alone after being widowed, and who had no patience for men who hurt women. "You must be Roberto," she said without inviting him in. "My cousin is waiting for you in the yard. But before you come into my house, let's get a few things straight." Roberto, who looked haggard and nervous, with deep circles under his eyes and wrinkled clothes, just nodded. "First, though, there is no yelling in this house. Second, no alcohol is drunk in this house. Third, women and children are respected in this house. If you can't abide by those rules, you can stay in your car." "I understand," Roberto muttered. "I accept the rules." "Well, come in, but remember that you're here because Remedios decided to give you a chance you don't deserve." Roberto walked slowly toward the patio, where Remedios was waiting for him. When he saw her for the first time since the night he had left, he gasped. She was different, not only because she had given birth, but because of something in her eyes. The way she held her head, the way she looked at him, without lowering her gaze. This was not the submissive woman he had hit in the restaurant kitchen. This was a completely different person. "Hello, Roberto," she said in a calm voice, without stopping rocking Emiliano. "Remedios." Roberto took a few steps closer, but stopped when she raised her hand. "Can you sit in that chair?" she said, pointing to a white plastic chair on the other side of the patio. "But don't come any closer, without my permission." Roberto obeyed immediately, sitting on the edge of the chair, as if he were in a job interview on which his life depended. "Did you read everything I left in your office?" Remedios asked. "Yes, everything." Roberto rubbed his hands nervously. "My mother's letters. I didn't know that she knew exactly what kind of man you were, that she felt guilty for raising you like a monster, that she knew you would hurt any woman who fell in love with you." Every word was a slap in the face. Roberto lowered his head. "Yes, I didn't know any of that. Now you do. The question is, what are you going to do with that information?" Roberto looked up at the baby. Remedios was holding in her arms. "Can I see him? First, let's talk. Then, if you convince me that you really understand what's going on here, maybe I'll let you meet your son." Roberto nodded, waiting. "For 2 years, Remedios began. You turned me into your slave. You yelled at me. You humiliated me in front of the employees. You hit me when I was pregnant and threatened to take my baby away from me." Roberto opened his mouth to speak, but Remedios interrupted him. "Don't say anything yet. I'm not finished. During those 2 years, you made me believe that I was worthless, that I was stupid, that I couldn't do anything right. You made me believe that I depended completely on you for everything. Home, food, work, even breathing. But you were wrong, Roberto, because it turns out that I am much smarter than you thought, much stronger, and much more dangerous when someone threatens my child." Roberto shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Over the last 2 weeks, while you thought you had me under control, I was gathering evidence of all your crimes. I documented every peso you stole from the restaurant. I photographed every bottle you hide in your office. I recorded testimonies from all the employees who have seen how you treat me. I also found the illegal lenders you owe money to. Yes, Roberto, I know about those loans you took out without telling me. I know you owe 50,000 pesos to Don Aurelio Mendoza, the lender in San Andres, Cholula. I know you've been using the restaurant as collateral." Roberto turned pale. "How? How do I know?" "Because for 2 years you thought I was an idiot who was only good for cooking and cleaning. You never realized that I was paying attention to everything, every phone conversation, every piece of paper you left on your desk, every time you came home drunk muttering about money you owed." Remedios changed Emiliano's position, who had finished eating and was now fast asleep. "Right now, Roberto, you have 2 options. You can choose the first option, which is to leave here, go back to San Antonio, and continue being the same man you've always been. If you choose that option, tomorrow morning, I'm going to file a complaint for domestic violence. I'm also going to send copies of all the evidence of your thefts to the public prosecutor's office, the Treasury, and Don Aurelio Mendoza, so he knows exactly how you're going to pay him back. And the second option is that you accept that your life as you knew it is over forever. That you agree to go to psychological therapy to control your anger. That you agree to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, even though you swear you're not an alcoholic. That you agree to return every penny you stole from the restaurant and pay all the debts you've hidden." Roberto listened silently, his eyes fixed on the floor. "If you choose the second option," Remedios continued, "you're going to have to earn the right to be part of your son's life. Not because you're his biological father, but because you prove that you can be the kind of man he needs as a role model." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that for the next 6 months, you will come here every Sunday at 2 p.m. You will sit in this same chair, talk to me for an hour about what you have learned in therapy, and then, if you convince me that you are really changing, I will let you hold Emiliano for 15 minutes. 15 minutes only. At first, yes, as you prove that you can control your temper, that you can talk without yelling, that you can be in the same room with me without intimidating me. Those 15 minutes can turn into half an hour, then an hour, then a whole afternoon, and then 6 months. After 6 months, if you've done everything I'm asking, if you've paid all your debts, if you've stopped drinking completely, and if the therapist confirms that you're making real progress, then we can talk about you coming back to live with us, but not in the same house, and not under the same conditions. If we ever become a family again, it will be because I decide that you are safe for my son, and it will be under rules that I will set." Roberto was silent for several minutes, processing everything he had just heard. "And if I can't comply with all of that, if I'm not capable of changing that much, then you're going to lose your family forever, and you're going to have to live with the guilt of knowing that you had a chance to be different, and you wasted it." "But Roberto," Remedios leaned forward, looking him straight in the eye, "I want you to understand something very important. This is not a negotiation. It's not a discussion where you can give your opinion or suggest changes. These are my conditions. Take it or leave it." "I'll take it," Roberto said immediately. "I accept everything. Everything you just said. Are you sure? Because there won't be any second chances after this. If you fail, if you go back to your old habits, if you disrespect me even once, it's over forever. I'm sure of it. I want to change, Remedios. I need to change." Remedios studied his face for a long moment, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But what she saw was something she had never seen before in Roberto's eyes. Genuine fear. Fear of losing everything he cared about. "All right," she finally said. "You can meet your son." She rose from the rocking chair and walked slowly toward where Roberto was sitting. He immediately stood up with trembling hands outstretched. "His name is Emiliano," Remedios said, carefully placing the baby in his father's arms. "He weighs 5 pounds, 2 ounces. He was born on Wednesday at 11:43 p.m. and is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life." Roberto looked down at his son's perfect face and began to cry. These were not the tears of a man feeling sorry for himself, but the tears of a man realizing how close he had come to losing something irreplaceable. "Hello, Emiliano," he whispered in a broken voice. "I'm your dad, and I swear I'm going to be better than I've been, so far." Remedios watched him during those first few minutes, studying every expression, every movement, every word. And for the first time in 2 years, she saw something in Roberto that gave her a glimmer of hope, genuine vulnerability. The 15 minutes were up, she said after what seemed like an eternity. Roberto handed the baby back to her without protest, although Remedios could see that it was difficult for him to let go. When can I come back? Next Sunday at 2 o'clock sharp. And Roberto, yes, you'd better use this week to find a good therapist, because on Sunday I'm going to ask you when your first appointment is, and if you don't have an answer, this conversation will be over forever. Roberto nodded vigorously. I'll do it. I promise. Don't promise me anything. Just do it. Roberto walked toward the door of the house, but before leaving, he turned around one last time. Remedios, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I know I don't deserve it. You're right, she replied without hesitation. You don't deserve it. But my son deserves the opportunity to have a father, even if it's one who has to learn how to do it from scratch. After Roberto left, Remedios sat in the courtyard with Emiliano in her arms, watching the sun set over the red-tiled rooftops of New Braunfels. Esperanza came over and sat in the chair Roberto had been sitting in. Do you think he'll keep his promise? She asked. I don't know, Remedios replied honestly. But for the first time in 2 years, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear of losing everything. And sometimes fear is the only thing that can make a person change. And if he doesn't change, Remedios smiled. But it wasn't a sweet smile. It was the smile of a woman who had discovered her own power and wasn't afraid to use it. If he doesn't change, then Emiliano will grow up knowing that his mother was strong enough to protect him from a toxic father. And Roberto will spend the rest of his life knowing that he had the opportunity to get to know his son and wasted it. But I think he will change, because now he knows he has no other choice. That night, while Emiliano slept in the wooden crib that his cousin Rocío had built for him, Remedios sat by the window in her room and wrote in a new notebook. Dear Emiliano, today you met your dad for the first time. I don't know if he's going to be part of your life or not, but I want you to know something. Your mother will never let anyone hurt you. You will never live in fear like I did. You will never think you are less than you are, like I did. If your dad learns to be the man he should be, then you will have a complete and loving family. If he doesn't learn, then you will have something just as valuable. A mother who taught you that true love doesn't hurt, who respects you, and would never make you feel small. Whatever happens, my child, you will grow up free. I promise you that. Your mom, who loves you more than life itself. She closed the notebook and put it in the drawer next to her bed. Someday, when Emiliano was older, she would give him that notebook so he could understand the story of how a woman found the strength to change not only her own life, but also her son's. Outside, on the cobblestone streets of New Braunfels, life went on as usual. Families dining together, children playing in the courtyards, couples strolling hand in hand under the yellow streetlights. But inside that small house with blue walls, something new had begun. A new family created under new rules, where love was not accompanied by fear, where strength was not confused with violence, where a mother had learned that sometimes the greatest sign of love is being willing to fight for those who cannot defend themselves. Moral remedies. She was no longer the woman who had been beaten in the kitchen of a restaurant in San Antonio. Now, she was the woman who had transformed that pain into power, that humiliation into dignity, that despair into hope. And her son would grow up knowing the difference. That was the best revenge of all. Not the destruction of Roberto, but the construction of a better life for herself and Emiliano. A life where finally, after years of silence, she had the last word. And that word was free. Well, thank you for accompanying me to the end of this story. Your time and support mean a lot to this channel. Don't forget to leave your like, subscribe, and activate notifications. Tell me what you thought in the comments, and what other stories would you like to hear. See you next time.